All right, so today we're covering vacant land contracts. This is not a lengthy contract, but it's important to fill them out properly, right? So vacant land contract doesn't mean that there's a house on it. Doesn't mean that there's a mobile home on it. It should be vacant land. The only way you can use a vacant land contract if there's a structure on it is if that structure is uninhabitable and somebody's planning on demoing it, okay? So of course you put the address in, the legal description, just like any other property. Important to put your section, township, and range because we want to make for darn sure this is correct. Copy this directly out of the tax records, guys. Of course, put your price in, escrow agent, contacts. These are all the standard things that we have to do. And then we come down to initial deposit. 0 if left blank. I don't know of anybody that's going to accept a contract or a purchase offer without having some sort of escrow down, unless it's just close friends that are doing a transaction. So what we typically will say is will be delivered to the escrow agent, right? Within 3 days, put the 3, don't leave blanks, and put the amount. Now, what can happen with this also with vacant land is we can say that this initial deposit's rather low. So maybe it's let's say it's $1 million property. They put $5,000 down because they're going to put an additional deposit down once their inspection period, their due diligence period is up, right? So this is the part we want to use right here. And you can put the 3 there, put whatever that amount is there. And once again, due diligence is where they're doing their inspections of the property. They're making sure that they can use the property for what they want to use it for. You know, oftentimes a seller will say that it's buildable. You check with the county, it's not buildable. You back out, you get your money back because number one, they misled you, but number two, they just probably didn't know and they thought, well, it's 5 acres, why can't you build on it? There are variations to every deal, right? So everything depends. So, right, mineral rights and things like that. So we want to be careful with those things. There are people that will buy property without the mineral rights. I never would, but it doesn't mean that it's not something that people do. So complete only if price will be determined based on per unit cost instead of a fixed price. In other words, if we're saying per acre, because they're not positive of their acreage. So like the one Chris was just in, we'd be putting in that it's 12,000 an acre, and they're going to turn around and ask for 14,500 an acre, or at least the neighbor did, and then everybody throws up and the deal blows up. But it's worth a try. So again, these things are important, and there has to be a right of way to the property, especially if you want it to be buildable. So let's say that this property sets back behind other properties. You need to make sure that there is the proper easement right of way, if they don't own that property, that gives access to the property if somebody wants to build on it, number one. So that has to be at least, what, a 60-foot easement, and it has to have a stable drive with possibly a culvert if needed, so that a fire truck can get back to that property. And those are the requirements for that, okay? And otherwise you can't build on it. So somebody could buy that property all day long and it's totally landlocked and they can't do anything with it and they can't even get to it without easement, okay? And it happens. So be careful with that. And especially even if a seller goes, well, you can go down that road right there, that dirt road, it's a county road and it comes right to our property. Yeah, it doesn't mean it actually goes to the property. The folks on this side might own that and not really give you access. Might have been being friendly with them and not with a new buyer. So important things to consider. Time periods for acceptance. Of course, this is the same as any other contract we do. You put in whatever the buyer and seller are comfortable with, okay? And it's the same as always. Effective date is the day the last seller or buyer has initialed the last change or final counteroffer, right? Closing date. Same as any other contract we do. But you know, we need to make sure that all the periods, including not limited to financing, due diligence periods, are done. You don't want those things to, and I've seen contracts written where the financing and or due diligence period um, goes post-closing. And it's just silly to have it written that way, because what it means is that during the due diligence period, people say the day before closing or day of closing, yeah, we don't want to close because it really doesn't do, we can't do what we want with the property. And you've been sitting there with the property off the market. It's just a bad way to do business. So extensions, that happens all the time. If we need an extension, because there are certain requirements that haven't been met, and or people need longer, they found something out about the property they want to know more about, such as somebody buys a property, plans on building a school on it, has to do a water test, to groundwater test to be able to build that building on it, right? Well, I don't know if people understand that or not, but if you're building a school, you have to be able to test the groundwater to make sure that there aren't any chemicals in it and things that would affect a child or people. When they check those things, oftentimes it's a challenge, especially if it's been farmland and they've had the dip ponds. In other words, the chemical ponds that they walk their cattle through to treat them. It tends to mess up the groundwater eventually, is what I've been told. So we have to be careful with those things, okay? Yes, it is. It sure is, and that's why, is my understanding. So the only thing they can do at that point, if they still want to build on it, is check out what the remediation costs are, and they're extreme, but you can actually remediate the groundwater. It's crazy. So things to know, and things that again really affect whether or not you're doing your business properly and making sure that your buyer and or seller has a full handle on what they have. Okay. Oh, I didn't see him. Sorry, Chris. Didn't mean to leave you blocked out over there. But anyway, right now we're looking at the financing section of this, and it's interesting because, of course, Chris just got on and he does loans. I don't know if you do land loans or not, Chris, but that's what we're talking about right now. These vacant land contracts. So contracts contingent on the buyer qualifying. Of course, it's financing. How many days? These are our standards in the industry, right? New financing, seller financing. This is not out of the ordinary on a land piece of land. It happens oftentimes. People bought it long time ago, have owned it, have farmed it, and they're willing to finance it and get their payments in for a set amount of time with a balloon note usually. Mortgage assumption. This is what Daphne and I were talking about a little bit ago, that when you assume a mortgage, it's going to be the first mortgage, whatever that amount is, providing you qualify for that mortgage, and whatever the current payments are, all of those things. And then you're typically going to have a wraparound mortgage that covers the difference in what the assumable mortgage portion was and the purchase price. So good things to know. Assignability. With land, again, it's not uncommon to want to assign it. These are the same comments and statements that you're going to see in any of the contracts that we use. And the thing is, if somebody says may assign and be released from further liabilities under this contract, they're usually a wholesaler. They're trying to make their money on the property in between. They're thinking that it's underpriced. They offer on it, put it right back on the market, and ask for more money and try and sell it in between before closing. And if they don't, then they just say, hey, we're released, we're out. And because we're assigning it over here and we don't have any liability. I don't mind this one at all. May assign but not be released from liability under the contract. A lot of people want to put it in a trust or a different LLC name, something they're creating. That would be the reason for this oftentimes, and they're just not sure of the name they're going to put it in. May not assign this contract. If you select this one, I totally get that. But if this occurs that somebody has a different name change, then you do an addendum to the contract, right? Different ways of handling it. Title. Seller has legal capacity, and which kind of deed are you going to get? So there's all sorts of things here. Would prefer to see statutory if we can. Special warranty deed, I see those oftentimes with bank-owned properties and things like that. Title evidence, again, guys, these are standard things that you're going to see in our contract. And it's who's picking and paying. Bottom line, seller's expense within, but you're putting dates now, okay, time periods, and talk to your closing agent and see how quickly they're going to actually be able to get the title searches done. Very important over the holiday periods where we are now, because certain companies, their attorneys go on vacation. Imagine that, just like a lot of people do. So we need to make sure that we can actually get the deal done and the title insurances and everything in place as we should. Now, vacant land, let's talk about that for just another moment when we're talking about title insurance. What about regular insurance, liability insurance on vacant land? It's really kind of crazy if somebody doesn't carry that. If somebody trespasses on your land and gets hurt, you're liable. It's a crazy setup, but welcome to our world, okay? So if somebody's out there hunting, shoots their hunting buddy, they're going to come after the landowner. It is what it is. And so you want to definitely post it as no trespassing according to the law, which I think it's like every 100 feet you need to sign, whatever that is, I'm not positive. But you need to do that, and then it's wise to have the insurance and do post the land however the insurance companies tell you to, okay? So they can also do an abstract title. There's different ways of doing it. Title examination, 10 days, don't leave a blank, put 10. 30 days, if buyer fails to deliver notice of defects, buyer delivers proper notice of written, these are, if the defects are there and they're not curable or not willing to be cured by the seller, then the buyer can either walk away from the contract or stay. If they stay, they're accepting it as is, okay? Buyer's expense have the property surveyed. And of course, it's great if somebody else has it surveyed, but I would still highly encourage anybody that buys a piece of land to have it surveyed so they know what they're buying. Some people will think that that pond or that lake is on my property or the stream is on my property. So we can run cattle on it, and you come back after they buy it and there's a fence up. Can't use it because it's not yours. You need to make sure that what you're buying is what you're buying, okay? So that's why it's always important to have surveys and to have ingress and egress to the property, right? This seller warrants that the property presently has these things. Verify, trust but verify, all of these things. And that's part of being a professional agent, folks. We need to make sure that we verify what a listing agent is telling us, and don't worry about doing their job for them, because the big thing about doing the mission, that statement there is, I like that one. If you follow the mission and do their job, you'll get to a commission. It's just the way it works. If you don't, you might not, okay? So inspections, this is the big difference here, due diligence. And this is an important part of things that, we need to make sure that, again, the property can be used the way that buyer wants to use the property. And I don't know why they talk about repairs and damages and things unless somebody actually does a test dig or a perk test on the property to see if they can actually build on it or whatnot. But because you can even have the county say, yes, you can build on it, and then the ground not be stable enough to put the house on. These are, and or the flood zones are a real issue for that property. It happens. Uh-huh. Okay. Sure can. Okay. Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, that's true too. So, and or fences, corrals, whatever, those sort of things. But you need to deliver notice to the seller of buyer's determination of whether or not the property is acceptable. You want to put that in writing, and you want to make sure that that's moving forward or that it's not, okay? Because again, buyer written notice of this fact and timely delivered to the seller, this contract will be deemed terminated and the buyer's deposit will be returned. If you skip this phase and the buyer wants out, they lose their deposit, okay? How about somebody says, yes, I want the property, period, no due diligence? That's scary. And or you've got a seller that goes, look, I'm not gonna sign a contract with a due diligence period. You can have access to the property, do your due diligence beforehand, and then bring me an offer with none of these contingencies, and we'll move forward. Okay. What if it's in a flood zone? Pretty important to know. It's not as big a deal typically if there's cattle, but yet there is a big deal if we have a major storm and there's cattle and they have nowhere to go because, it happens in Florida. They drowned. It's a terrible deal. So coastal construction control line. Again, you can find out very quickly whether or not the property is in that area, and you should get an affidavit or a survey based on this if you're within that boundary. But buyer can go, nope, don't care, I want to buy it, and or I did it ahead of time, I'm good. Okay. Closing costs, closing procedures. This is just simply saying who is to do what. The seller's paying these things, and of course, you could always say here, survey. You can cross this out. You can put it on the seller. There's nothing saying we can't negotiate these things, and or the seller had a survey and it's recent and it's good enough to even carry the loan if they get a loan. Some folks, of course, a lot of folks on land don't get loans. They're writing checks. So don't be surprised about that. But
could you just put it like in the other, like, for example, like if the seller already has the survey, just type it in the other under buyer cost, seller has a survey already, so.
yeah, you put
Just
survey.
type it.
That's the seller's cost, survey.
No, I'm saying, can you just, on the buyer cost, you see how it's a survey,
Mhm.
then cross it out, can we just type it in under other, like on the
Or
line?
like survey to be provided by.
Yeah,
seller.
Not under buyer's cost. I'd cross it out and I'd put it
okay.
here.
Oh,
Yeah, you just wanna make sure it's written.
You put it in the right location, okay? So that if you put it here, this is on the buyer. No matter what you say here, this is saying buyer's costs. So you want it to be a seller's cost or provided, put it there. Okay. Prorations, again, same as always, on your taxes and everything else that's imposed on that property. And again, if it's a standard construction lot, you may have a CDD fee, HOA fees, one-time buy-in fees for certain communities, all these fun things. Okay. Special assessments. This is something that I would definitely be calling the county before I got in with that land, because a seller may not have researched it or paid attention to all the mailings that came to them. So you want to verify that there are no special assessments. And if there are, who pays them? Do they pay them? Does a buyer pay them after closing and a seller pays them before closing? Or does a seller have to pay them off in full? These are things that you can determine again and negotiate if need be. Again, CDDs and taxes, things like that, it's just seller pays till closing, buyer owns it after, right? So property tax disclosure summary. It's really nice if we can get some disclosures out of sellers, but oftentimes they don't know. So this just says clearly that buyers should not rely on the seller's current property taxes as the amount of the property tax is going to be, because what if they, it's based on what they paid for it way back when, typically. And oftentimes, if the tax man sees that price change dramatically on the property, it can trigger a reassessment. FERPA. This is very important if the seller's foreign. So we need to comply with FERPA. So these things, if not, can cost, typically what you're going to have is the seller is going to have to put like 15% of the sale price in escrow to be paid on taxes. Okay, it's the way it works. But you can again talk to the title agent about how to handle that properly, but there is definitely a FERPA addendum that you should include. How about a 1031 exchange? 1031s are very common because it's another method of kicking the tax can down the road, so to speak. So when you do that, you buy the property in the 1031 that's done through a mediator. So you need to use typically, I've worked with Riddell Law. Cindy Riddell does a very nice job with those for us. But again, it just helps kick that tax can down the road. But you need to make sure you do these things properly. So use the professionals that know what they're doing with these things. Computation of time, calendar days, computing time periods, talks about holidays, things like that. Time's always of the essence. How about risk of loss, eminent domain? Would it not be important to maybe check and see what's going on around the property? We should do this with any property we sell. I mean, let's face it, if there's a beautiful home and it backs up to what appears to be a preserve, but that's getting ready to be turned into homes, that's an issue. If a buyer buys that and you didn't research that and know it and tell them that, you need to do your job with these things, which means, yes, we research the property around them. If there's an interstate that's going to be going in through their backyard, think it'll affect their property value? Heck yeah. So let's protect them. Okay.
That research, what's the
Mhm.
first thing? Look up.
I call the county.
Okay.
I call them. Yeah, I just call them. I'm lazy. I don't do all the computer digging. I make phone calls. I'm old school. I still like the phone a lot. So that's what I want. And then I'll get their email and I'll send them an email and just to reiterate what I believe they told me to make sure that it's true, and just ask her, hey, can you confirm that I got this correct? Yeah. Okay. Seller or buyer to perform any obligation in the contract, liable, other damages. This is force majeure. You know, if there's a hurricane that comes through and lays down every tree on the property, we've got things we're going to deal with, and it's definitely going to delay a closing, right? Notices, all notices in writing delivered to all parties, and broker by mail, personal mail, electronic means. Of course, we're going to do app files. Buyer failure to timely deliver written notice. This is a terrible thing. Don't do it. Stay on task. Complete agreement, just saying that everything in this is complete and its provision becomes invalid or enforceable. All other provisions will remain the same and be effective. Default resolution, you know, now we're getting into the same kind of things in every contract, but seller default. If the seller fails to do their job and everything, then the buyer gets their money back. And yet they can also sue them for forced performance. Just because a seller changes their mind and decides that, yeah, we're under contract, but now I want to list it and I'm going to sell it for more, and you're under contract with them, that buyer can sue them for forced performance, and they'll end up selling that property to them. Well, sometimes it depends on who has more money. That's the sad part. So again, that's a seller's breach, and seller will also be liable for the full amount of the brokerage fee or commissions, right? Buyer default, buyer fails. It goes through all of these things and how it's handled. Attorneys, fees, escrow agents. Again, you guys should stop and read the entire contract. If you're going to write a contract and fill in the blanks of one of these contracts that, of course, is from the Florida Bar Association, wouldn't you want to read it? I just think it's smart. It's amazing how many agents will not read this. They'll only fill in the small number of blanks that they can. They don't highlight it and look for any questions that they may have. And, you know, we can also call the hotline for the attorneys that are available to us for free. It's a realtor hotline, and ask the questions. You can ask me, but I think it's wise to ask them as well, because I may not have everything right. I'm sure I don't. I try my best to be clear and have these things all correct. But if I have a question, I call the hotline or I call one of the attorneys we work with routinely and say, hey, what's this mean? The latest one for me with that, just to be frank, was the addendum that specifies appraisals. I always thought that it was completely redundant to have that when you already have a financing contingency in a contract, because it has to appraise, right? Didn't realize that the attorneys dwell on small details, right? This is a much broader sweep. They're just, if it doesn't appraise, they're just out, they get their money back, done, see ya. And it's a much broader deal, okay? So it gives the buyers more of an out. It's always wise if somebody wants to have professional advice that they do. If they're working through attorneys, then you need to work through those attorneys as well. You need to find out who they are. And my suggestion is that as you're sending emails, you copy them on them. And you know, some buyers and sellers may not like that as much because they may get a bill for it. But guess what? They're the ones that hired them, and we want to make sure that we honor that. Okay? And encourage it. Commercial real estate, it's a different deal. If it's a commercial sale, it's talking about liens, but how about commission? Typically on a commercial real estate transaction, the buyer pays the listing agent's commission. There are times where the seller will still pay it, but again, those things are negotiable, more negotiable now than ever with what's going on in the real estate world. But so I think that you should have those forms filled out with your buyers before you start showing them properties, even because they don't know how you get paid, and it's smart that they realize that. And of course, then who are the brokers and sales associates? Fill them in. Fill in everything that you possibly can, right? And if you get down into additional addenda, it could be because there's a kick out clause or a backup to another contract. And these things are important to know. If you got a backup, or how about if it's contingent upon the sale of another property? Yeah, pretty important to note here, because it could blow up if that property doesn't sell. So we call that as, one transaction leaning on another. So if this one doesn't close, both of them fail. Okay, so we need to be careful with that. So again, this is where we go. Same as any other agreement, where of course, if there's a counter, we check counter, or if a seller rejects. I love this because it points out that the seller actually saw it and that they rejected it, period. And it's always frustrating when you get a direct rejection instead of a counter offer, because then you don't know what they want. It's interesting because, and that's where I'm always calling and just trying to feel them out a little bit more. What are you guys looking for? Help me out here. If it's an attorney that's killing the deal because they want more money to cover taxes and things like that, then you need to make sure that you're working with that attorney, find out who they are, copy them on your emails, okay? Not necessarily when you're writing the contract as a buyer's agent. When you're writing a purchase offer, when you're in contract, that's when you definitely want to have those things as the buyer's agent and copy them on it, okay? Because who knows if the listing agent's actually going to do that properly. So again, we get down to signatures, everybody signs, everybody's happy, and you sell another beautiful piece of land.